Okay, so welcome to the February 12th edition of the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts reading series, featuring a discussion with Palestinian American poets Issam Zineh and Carolina Ebeid. We're really excited for this event. I think Issam said earlier in the week, let's normalize poetry as a national pastime. I'm a sports freak, and I still approve that message very much. Alta Mesa Center for the Arts is an interfaith arts and spirituality hub housed within and sponsored by Arinda Community Church. We believe that art is a spiritual act and a human right. We wish to provide a place where people from diverse traditions, artistic practices, and economic realities come together in community. We know that art can bridge the divisions, substantive and arbitrary, that divide us. We come together not only to practice and to teach the arts, but to celebrate and learn from our differences and to foster lively and respectful interdisciplinary dialogues. We seek unity in diversity. So wherever you are on your artistic or your spiritual journey, and whoever you are welcome in this space. I'm going to introduce pastor and poet Elizabeth Robinson, who will be emceeing this event. And while we'll keep the chat going and you're welcome to offer anything you so choose, we'll save the questions till after. So thank you. It's lovely to see you, and we will begin.
I'm delighted to have Carolina and Issam here. I love the writing of both, and I like that they are doing things very differently. So I think we'll have a really nice, beautifully textured reading. So I will just read the bios for both of them. Then Carolina will read, and then Issam will read, and then conversation can commence. So Carolina Ebeid is a multimedia poet. Her first book, You Asked Me to Talk About the Interior, there it is, was published by Noemi Press as part of the Acrylica series and selected as one of the 10 best debuts by poets and writers. Her work has been supported by the Stadler Center for Poetry at Bucknell University, Red Loaf, Pronto Mundo, the NEA, as well as a residency fellowship from the Lannan Foundation. She is on the faculty at the Mile High MFA at Regis University in Denver, the bilingual MFA at the University of Texas at El Paso, and Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver. A longtime editor, she currently edits poetry at the Rumpus, as well as the multimedia zine Visible Binary. Carolina grew up in West New York, New Jersey, and in a Cuban and Palestinian family. So before she begins, I will read Issam's bio as well. Issam Zineh, or no, I've just said it wrong, Zineh, is a Palestinian American poet and scientist. He is the author of Unceded Land, Trio House Press, which just came out last year, which was an editor's selection and finalist for the Trio Award for first or second book. And he is the author of the chapbook, The Moment of Greatest Alienation from Ethel Press. His poems appear or are forthcoming in Agni, Guernica, Gulf Coast, Pleiades, Tahoma Literary Review, The Rumpus, and elsewhere. So welcome, and we are excited to hear you read.
Well, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Elizabeth and Mary, for inviting us into this very warm, dynamic space, it seems. And such a pleasure to read with Issam again, second time. And I get the sense that we'll be doing this more often, Issam, throughout our lives. And thanks all of you for coming and for going the football game that's going on right now. I look forward to your listening and to the conversation that could come out of it. I am going to begin with a video poem that I wrote in the wake of my mother's death last year. And it is a poem, I'll share my screen in a second. It is a poem that comes out of work that I've been doing with family archives. After my mother died, I had the task of organizing, getting rid of a lot and sorting out a lot. And I found tapes, video cassettes, all sorts of this archival familial material. And I decided that I would use it in an artistic way with the video work that I've been interested in. And in this one, in the third part, it's just a 3-minute video, you'll hear my mother speaking to family in California from New Jersey. And my mother, in her English, and Spanish was her first language, is speaking a little bit of Arabic to the Arabic family in California. And my father just recorded everything, so even mundane conversations. So here we go. I'm going to make sure that my sharing includes the best kind of sound. So here we go. And
voice becoming an artifact. Hatif is Arabic for telephone. Voice. Telephone is more common a synonym. Very cinematic. Your mother's faraway voice on tape. A cassette. You recognize the sepal in it. A casket. In it, a youth and oath. Discarded. Many a voice of melted in a landfill sometime now.
الو مرحبا مرحبا كيف حالك؟ فريقة How are you? Very good. مرحبا كيف حالك فريقة؟ هلا أهلا. How are you been? Oh, pretty good. How's everything with you? How's Elias? He's fine. Yeah, and Auntie and Ammi and Auntie Louisa, everybody? Yeah, okay. Are they awake?
Okay. Next, I'm going to read from my manuscript, Hide. The little I know about the forms moving through unlit towns. To open a jar of water from the Dead Sea. To find no flora or fauna living save for the numerous bacteria. This is how it gets death into its name, because that saline content cannot sustain, feature or glitch, life. To lie down in it and float and float. To arrive by boat, by air, by walking across a state line. To see AMCA, that first evening of new homeland. To see the yonder oxen and amber waves of methane. If you feel something, fail something. To make a digital map of fear, a shyness map, a map of disappointed lovers. You drink the water. Disambiguation of Miriam. Ask her if she is cold. Ask her if she needs to hide. Fold her into a rectangle and slip her into your breast pocket. She will record the auditory data regarding the condition of the heart. Mother dreaming. Mother turning into sleep. Mother changing the channel. Mother turning underwater. M mostly becomes sunflower head bending down. Here, the here-ness of memory. Mostly touchable, mostly. Mother becomes mostly asymmetrical. In Arabic, mir is bitter and iam is sea. I'm going to read fragments from the last chapter of the manuscript Hide, and it's called Dar Wonder, a brief record of facts. And it was just made into a chapbook by Brian Tier's press, if you're familiar with the poet Brian Tier, Albion Books. And it begins with this evocation, glitch bitches, glitch brain, alphanumeric names, maladaptive daydreamer, ongoing wonder, unspeakable, speak. The poet Brandon Shimoda asks the question, where do ancestors gather? Where do the ancestors gather? And this is my email, the correspondence that I had with him. Dear Brandon, my son Patrick and I were at my computer typing words into Google Translate from English to Arabic. It's a femme computer-generated voice that speaks the Arabic words. And when you press listen button the second time, she speaks the words very slowly. The word for water, rose, war, sea, airplane, pillow, sky. Then I transliterated these sounds into my notebook. Then something happened, a glitch. When we refreshed the page, every previous pronouncement, every slow enunciation played for 10 seconds of simultaneous talking. We refreshed a second time, and it happened again, a sudden marketplace of voices. I opened my phone's voice memo app and recorded it. I attach it here. Perhaps the ancestors are in the DNA and how it travels, having itself from body to body, in language, and how it travels from mouth to ear to mouth to ear? And what about in glitches? Are they there? Can we say they find a slit or tear in the digital universe to speak through to us? I need courage. Do you have any to send my way? Dear Carol, I think all the courage is theirs, the women, their voices in the marketplace, and in the permission they're giving. What were their voices before you and Patrick created the glitch? You refreshed the page. That is what happened. You refreshed the page. The page has been refreshed, and now the marketplace comes to life. Glitch, a sudden surge of current. If I grew out of your winter thought, purse, chest cavity, would I would be plant-wise, wiser for the spiny edge and milk veins. This wonder's so ancient, so Mesopotamian. Look at Miriam, who covers her mouth when she laughs. Look at Miriam, who wears her dress like a casket. You have to use the telepathy machine, feelings as artifacts. You have to use the channel O for the ancestor to pass through. Yawn her up from the white space in alphanumeric names, their cambered Arabic numerals, a Semitic pneumatic, a Newman. The word emerge as transitive and imperative. Emerge the blank out of the blank. Emerge the information out of the sound. Emerge the sound out of the child. Emerge the child out of miracle. Emerge the miracle out of the burning car. Emerge the burning car out of music. Emerge music out of sleep. Emerge sleep out of the throat. Emerge the throat out of the possibility. Hippocampus controls short and long memory, named horse plus sea monster or seahorse for its shape, though the man who described the anatomy first called it a silkworm and then changed his mind. The silkworm eats of the mulberry leaves. From holes in its jaws, the silkworm excretes thread in circular movements, whirl a world, self-cocooning. In this video, the brain lights up where a new memory forms. Telepathy machine. I need to step outside this self, become a liquid sound in rose or warda. Thread might carry memory of the one who wore the skirt. Then if another inherits it or buys it secondhand, will the cloth transmit the traces of what happened before? What rustling? What is memory but whiff and wisp and stitch and pinprick, tear, rumor, murmur, periphery? How do you know you are remembering an event or remembering the pictures of an event? Do you dream in the first or the third person? Hollow of a torso, fill it with animal blood, gunpowder, feathers, mud. Look how it unthings a person. There are moments when terror breaks into something brighter and the brighter thought cocoons the mind. The word appall, verb to grow pale, pall, noun, perhaps from pellis, skin, altar cloth, coffin cover, Cover your open mouths. Put your phone in the air. Videos of the body wrapped in cloth under flowers. Shireen Abu Akleh. Over shoulders. Repetitiousness of corpses. Processions wailing. Public mourning. Get your phones in the air. Hand-covered mouths. Walking and crying outside, which is leafy and golden brown, sunny crisp, a Denver autumn. Grief was submerged for some while. And I was trying to write it on my phone with voice to text to say something about our neighborhood dust, wondering how much of my mother's skin in microparticles remains on her necklace I'm wearing. Grief wrestled up to the surface with its gasp of air. PZ450KJ093, microcasts, the microdust of her dust neck. Yes, screen in skin, we regret, we agree that green, great grief, Greek grief, skin on skin. Enclose the burring beetle. Enclose the flower moth with its white mouth overdose and hereafter. Enclose the white, the wet whites of eyes, cocoon thread or the Arctic blank of projector screen light. Archive the bone flutes and the percussive devices, the delicate cranium now light enough to build a hive in. Archive its leftover thoughts. Nighttime carries an arc and hive. Enclose any gold-touched ones, any that flicker, any called assassin, any with lace wings, nerve wings. Enclose the field gone fanatical with locusts, their victory pyrrhic, their plurinimity. So unfair to be a body, to have a name, be locatable, a code of DNA, to have a grave, a face, any eternity, eternal. Individually addressable one, who will sing you into the ground. Telepathy machine. The May lamb, gone of its soft guts, its life force changed, charged into red communication. You have to use your farthest voice. The world is such a place. Thank you so much. I will mute myself now and welcome Issam into the room of sound.
Thank you so much, Carolina. That was absolutely gorgeous. And thank you to Mary and to Elizabeth for this invitation. I just respect this space and you both so much. It's a real delight. And thank you to everyone who showed up. You are an elite group. There are millions and millions and millions and millions of other people watching something else right now. So thank you for making the time. Greetings from Piscataway Ancestral Land, Baltimore, Maryland. What I thought I'd do is just bounce around and try to read a few short poems, maybe make some game time changes from, I was inspired to read a couple of different poems than I'd originally planned based on the conversation earlier in the call. So I'll read a poem called Peacock, Egg Harbor City, New Jersey. And I guess what to know about this poem. In the early part of the pandemic, when everyone was grounded, we had a desperate need to visit some family members who weren't doing very well. And so we bought a camper, which was a lifelong dream. And I had to go get the camper inspected in a RV park in Egg Harbor City, New Jersey, which I'd never heard of before. And then I learned Egg Harbor City, New Jersey was established by Americans of German descent who were fleeing religious persecution by the Know Nothing movement, the Know Nothing Party, who was a very, some of you may know, right-wing, anti-immigrant, nativist bunch. And so when I went to this RV park, they had peacocks roaming around. So that inspired this poem. Peacock, Egg Harbor City, New Jersey. The couple that owns this place says the peacock has more than one mate. And did I know there are plants that bear flowers with stamens only, some only pistils? Though I see you in the early morning, I imagine you the same at dusk, sun and shade, petal and seed head, becoming anything you can fit into your beak. You are yourself an exercise in noticing. There is the stealth, what was once called furtive, the eye-spotted train that refuses, at least today, to be seen as anything other than a net of jewels. You've roamed all morning. Your spurs say, try me. The rest of you says, try again. You are blue as blue has never been. River water rendered in glass the moment before birth. Green as green has always been. One part territory, one part terror. You are not only what you are, but what you interrupt. In an RV park, in an American refuge. You are as much other as the movement that made this place. I've seen you before, served in full plumage in some Flemish painter's allegory. In Tulum, the day my second daughter was born. Among the Yazidi girls who jumped to their death from the sacred mountain as a gorgeous declaration of war. About this time last year, so I love Carolina Ebeid, I love her poetry and her editorial eye, and about this time last year, I got a note from the Rumpus that they were accepting a few of my poems, and I was absolutely thrilled. And so I thought tonight I would read the poems that were in the Rumpus. So the first one is called Gestures of Devotion Must Be Big If We Expect to Be Seen. The sky in clear water is the print of your dress, all aster and blue starling. The year ends the way it began, you asking me for the indescribable. Sky has no notion of sky. For all your looking up, your dreams, the ones you share as the light breaks, happen on Earth. We are at the bottom of a drained ocean. The sky is burnt orange and raw sienna. There is a monastery built into a mountain. You whisper, the monks will let a woman in before they let in a Protestant. I put a jade egg in your mouth and it becomes night. Every time you ask me what the sky is like where I am now, I feel I answer wrong, so I practice every day, write down answers to questions you haven't asked yet. The Inuit have a word that means both weather and consciousness. No one from the Holy Land calls it the Holy Land. Right of entry. You tell me not to look at the charts before I head out, that there are very few surprises this time of year. I should see what the sea has to offer when I get there. There are only locals left, and they don't go out in the winter. I tell you, I won't be long. There's more beach than sea. It's the lowest the tide has been since we bought the house. It's frigid, so cold. The only reason to be out here is that I'm already here. I walk the stretch I used to walk with your father. Light snow on a beach. There is life, a few random gulls. There's also approximation. The moorings are exposed down to the heavy chain. There is death we've become so accustomed to, we no longer see it as death. Seaweed, razor shells, and driftwood. I see a wrong kind of gray in the southern distance. Walk toward it. My stomach opens into my throat. It's a frozen raccoon. He's on his back, fours up, teeth barred with all the viciousness left from the body through wet obsidian marbles. How did you get here, little guy? I wonder how long you must have been here, how long you walked this shoreline before the knowing set in, what terrible thing you imagined you were fleeing, how necessary. Just across the wide road, there's Great Pond and the adjacent woods. I picture you there before here. Pitch pine, white cedar, tupelo. I have to decide what to tell you when I get back. Maybe that by the looks of it, the beach road is next on the town water project. They're getting the ground ready for the mains. According to the paper, there are a few landowners in the mandatory zone that have not signed over right of entry. When I get home, you are lying on the floor. Your knees are up, bound to each other with a belt. Your hands are on your lower belly. You're breathing slowly. I ask what you're doing. You say you're working with the front part of your heart, the part that meets the world first. You ask if I'm ready to die for a metaphor. My cousin burns half his face right off his skull, smoking cigarettes and huffing fumes on the roof. I push a baby stroller over the exposed roots of a red maple forest as you light the escape fire. I need more examples. You curl your hair behind your ear. Show me your growing stack of fiction, body after body rising from the cold spring. And thank you to Carolina for taking those. There in the middle part of unceded land, there's 3 sections. The middle section is a crown of sonnets. And so there's 7 poems that are kind of connected in a specific way where the last line of the poem becomes the first line of the next. And it's also a cento form. So all of the lines are borrowed from another poet, from other poets. Typically, this is from one other poet, Wanda Coleman, who is one of my heroes, poetic and otherwise. So I'll read the epigraph of that section, and I won't read all the poems. I'll just read 3 of them all the way through. So maybe you get a sense for the rhythm of it. So that section starts with this quote from Wanda Coleman's About God and Things. Merge our bodies, merge. Give, wealth, freedom. Congress cannot legislate away. And the poem sequence is called What If a Love Like This? I caught a starfish second summer after my divorce. You know it's your fault. You were once again standing off in the dark on the borderline between sea and soul. I licked the salt from your neck. Sing me rivers, the anthem of blue waters, the hymn of my eye the coastline disappears on. Then, this is the dark he lives in. I see myself thrown heart first into this ruin. I throw the symbols, I make reverberations, this compulsion to write one's name, substitute writer for mirror, visionary for window, hack for glass. No one answers, and that fact is a giant fly buzzing. Once I tried to hang myself and got terribly ashamed. Once I tried to hang myself and got terribly ashamed. I laughed, took off the rag I was wearing. The doctor asks me what I am. I say, a non sequitur. He is suddenly cool air, caress the light. My body calls. I have frequent fantasies about running over people I don't like. It is the early dawn. I'm 99% body. My brain has dissolved into basil and blackthorn. I become a name caller, a door through which I escape, another world. Smell of fresh, wet, black earth, a fire. We couldn't breathe until he threw water on me. Old son, he steady whispers, provide, he said, provide. Provide, he said, provide a fresh spray of mist and neon, camera action, blood and shoes. Remember the mountains of shoes? Use people, love things. I offer you whatever incites my blood, whatever cratered psyche, toast-colored skin, and lunar eclipses. This is the purple dawn, disharmony in all my parts. My bowels are in my throat. Can't tell mama about this. Pushed to the floor, but Max is not Max enough. At the tip of each finger, a separate universe. Living with you, he says, is like living with a Gauguin. Lift me through my skin. There is a poem I'd like to read. It's called Catastrophic Sonnet. The title alludes to the Nakba, which is Arabic for catastrophe. This is the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes in and around 1948. Many feel the Nakba has never ended, and it's considered a major source of intergenerational trauma among Palestinians in the diaspora as well. And also, I guess I'll also say the poem modifies a line from a poem called Death at Night's End by Walid Seif. Catastrophic Sonnet. My grandfather still has his house key from 1948. He says he lives in the part of the village where the past doesn't kill you. He invites his neighbors in for fruit and mixed nuts and something cool, then something hot. There is a belligerence of songbirds every square mile. Come see what I brought you from the market, he says. Cucumbers, local, pomegranates, za'atar. I see you've renounced your birthplace, which is of course your right. When they come for you, they will ask about your love's name, her contours, her address. You will dream of male sunbirds feeding on nectar midair. Where is it written that we're supposed to call? I misheard him talk of our rightful place at the top of the hill. My kids fell in love with imperialism last summer in London. They discovered legacy in the gardens. They woke to the logics of the enterprise. I miss the burgers at Johnny's. There are a couple of poems in this book that try to reimagine Greco-Roman myths. One called Backstory, I won't read, is reimagines the myth of Echo and Narcissus. Some people know that myth of Narcissus, a beautiful young Greek boy who rejects all overtures, romantic overtures, and falls in love with his own reflection in a pond. And so one poem speaks to that, and the other, I guess those poems try to imagine what's the source of all their baggage. And so I'll read a poem that's written, that's intended to be addressed to Narcissus from his mother, Liriope. Narcissus was said to be the result of Liriope's rape by a river god. She was a nymph, a specific kind of nymph who preside over fresh water. And so this poem imagines what a conversation with her son would be. It's called Liriope Gives Narcissus the Talk. On the Madison River, winter is a hideous act. The trumpeter swans furl and extend like periscopes and take to water as nature's perennial myth. The sun comes up like an artist into his wife. A palette knife that spreads the willful legs of sky commits to a crisis of color. This river can be found on improvised land. You live in a country of God, guns, and country, where some boys carry their own severed hands in their pockets. Imagine in one hand, I hold a red jasper. In the other, a snowflake obsidian. I offer them to you like strange, meticulous fruit. In this story, you are the sun. You are the symbol that must reciprocate. Early in the call, I got to meet Michal, who's working on a very, I think, important and brave project. And this made me want to read a poem that I wasn't planning on reading called The Last Poem I Write. On our trip to the Dead Sea, my daughter couldn't stop crying because the salt content was so high it burned her vagina. My best friend refuses to write about flowers, but feels it's acceptable to write about trees because of the more serious nature of the subject matter. There's a moral obligation in poetry not to pass on cruelty through the poem itself. Yellow bird magnolia. My daughter asks when I will put up the tree swing. Il-Bustan is Arabic for the garden. Rob Nixon calls the inattention we have paid to the attritional lethality of many crises slow violence. He means this in the context of ecological catastrophe. The Arabic word for catastrophe is nakba. The flowers in the vase are white lisianthus and heather. In the Il-Bustan neighborhood of Silwan, 13 families face home demolition to make way for a religious theme park where some believe King David owned a garden. A major concern with the lyric eye is whether the reader can empathize. Did you know David Jackson's funeral photo of Emmett Till first appeared in Jet magazine? The word magazine comes from the Arabic makhzan, which means storehouse. There's a moral obligation in poetry not to pass on cruelty through the poem itself. I should take the line about my uncle burning newborn mice out of the poem I wrote earlier this week. In the last poem I write, we pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill. There's a provision for planting crepe myrtles along the interstate. The problem with taking it out altogether, as I see it, is that it fails to consider intention. There's a moral obligation in poetry not to pass on cruelty through the poem itself. I really should take the line about my uncle burning newborn mice out of the poem I wrote earlier this week. Herbs gathered under the shade of frail acacias. Or maybe I can turn it into a question. Thank you, Michal, for the inspiration. And I will just read one more. This is in Unceded Land, and it's called word comes back. Thank you all for listening. Word comes back from the temple in Malta. One of the village girls has snuck in like a beggar in a forgotten city. She lies like a house cat on the high altar, witnessed only by the outdoor moon and the naughtiest angels. They pleasure themselves while the milk is being heated in the kitchen. Elsewhere, an engineer decides on the most efficient way to replace the Sphinx's current lion head with that of the pharaoh. The dimensions will be wrong. What's left will only hint of premeditation. All relationships are the same in the beginning. As we get to know the infinite technology of the body, nature pairs us back to the essentials. The early billion neuron bursts scaled to a relative handful in pyrotechnical brilliance. The brain's cells, bushmen with bouquets in their hands. The invisible tropics that divide our lobes and cortexes disappear in the moments immediately after our first apologies. We still miss each other sometimes. We look for things that are irretrievable in minor folds of solitude. We fire, we flood, we famine. We don't know much of petal or stamen, the easiest of metaphors, the easiest sounds the tongue can make. And still, God has set up its system. Proteins are synthesized and sent to correct destinations. The awfully beautiful things of the body go on happening. The embarrassment of the thigh's musk is over. We are mutually exclusive. There is one less secret to keep. You rethink your idea of God as lexicon, a plastic bag, a milder form of kindness. Thank you.
I'm muted, sorry. Thank you both for such beautiful, rich readings. I think there's a lot we could talk about in terms of formal decisions, preoccupations, content, but I want to try a little experiment here. I found interesting things in interviews or conversations with each of you. And so I am going to try to put into the chat a quote from a conversation that Issam had with, I don't know how to get it in. Let's see. Okay. So Issam had a conversation with Zineh Hashem Beck. And in that conversation, I'm asking you, Carolina, if you would like to read this and respond in your own terms. So I'm trying to translate a conversation between the two of you or facilitate one. Earlier this year, I came across an article in which Arushi Punia contemplates the role of memory in Palestinian literature. Among its many functions, she writes of memory as an act of protest and resistance. She asserts that literature then extends the resistive act of remembering and creates a sense of community through the narration of memory. Remembering, she writes, is an ethical act. It is against this backdrop, memory, and by extension, song, is arguably the most poetic and defiant form of memory, as the difference between cultural, sometimes literal, life and death, that I entered, I don't even know how you say that, Arabi song. So I'm, instead of Issam asking Zineh, I'm asking you, Carolina, can you talk a bit about what you see as the role poetry has to play in this particular moment with respect to resistance and even perhaps self-preservation? And I don't mean that you have to answer that as it can be deeply personal or political or however you, spiritual, however you choose to take that on, if you choose to take that on. And sorry if I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's okay. The spot is the point, I think. I mean, I think that there's something about poetry where you are in the spot, on the spot. I thought your question about, or the question about memory, those comments about remembering as an ethical act. I think that within poetry, we often are using that faculty of memory. Memory, of course, is painful. The act of remembering, just looking at the word and thinking of putting, Mary Ruffel puts it really beautifully about how memory is the act of putting a body back together, the members of the body onto its torso. And I think of my father and his incredible, almost picture perfect eidetic memory of what his childhood was like. He was born before 1948, and he can really sometimes close his eyes and just walk you through a street that quite literally doesn't exist anymore. And so the need to speak that, to hear that, seems ethical, and then to record it. And I'm thinking of just the simple act of writing, of making a poem as this technology to simply record, preserve that very thing. But I remember this recent, last year, I did sit with my father and set a recorder for him to just speak. It took some time for him to not speak in he's a very political person and has been all his life. And so he has a certain way of speaking in the we when put on the spot. But I wanted a more I perspective of what things tasted like, smelled like, what sounds he could remember. And so I was pushing him to try to recall and say those things. I have no idea if I've answered your that beautiful and difficult question, but I would love to hear what Issam said. I would much rather have it be a conversation.
Well, I got to ask the question, so I didn't have to answer it, but which was nice. But I think so. Zineh Hashem Beck, is a wonderful writer and person, and she felt that was particularly relevant to the Palestinian situation. And yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. In terms of writing, remembering as an ethical act. I mean, I think her point, and I would tend to agree, is that it's basically a life or death situation, and from the standpoint of erasure, right? So right now, what we're experiencing is a kind of erasure. I mean, every time you go and you buy, red velvet cake flavored hummus, that's a dagger through our hearts. And so please don't do that, by the way. No, so I think there's a very real feeling that that writing is it's a stay against extinction. It's a form of rebellion. In talking to Palestinian American writers who are, of the diaspora, there's a particular kind of rage and frustration that comes with sort of having one foot on each side of the world. And so so for me, at least in the writing of Unceded Land, there was a real sort of chip on my shoulder in that regard, and in some ways it's not a very generous book to the reader, because I felt like I was raging in certain parts of it. That said, there is the other side of power and subjugation, and that's and resistance, and that's reconciliation, and tenderness. And I think, for me, after having written this book, now I'm much more interested in that other side, like the rage and the kind of resistance. There are many, many writers who do a wonderful job with that. I'm kind of spent. I don't have much more to give in that regard. I'm much more interested in sort of like how tenderness might manifest. It's still hard to shake the tendencies of feeling like I must write down something that speaks to, the moment, which is necessarily political. But I guess it's how you choose to come at it. For me, memory has never really played a major role, because not because I don't want it to. I have terrible memory, and so I can't draw on my own memories for a source material. So that's why I'm always asking my family to talk to me about their experiences, and they're always suspicious about my motivations for that. What are you trying to write a book? So yeah, it's Elizabeth, I hope that gets at it at least partly.
Yeah, there's no right answer, just interesting to hear both of you work with those issues and describe that. I realize it's a couple minutes after 5, but I thought I would try one more. This is with an interview with Kaveh Akbar and Carolina, and I'm very awkward with the chat, so I'm sorry, Carolina. I gave you a long, complex quote and didn't post it so you could actually read it, but this time I have posted it awkwardly. So Carolina says, I remember carrying a notebook when Patrick and I would walk around in our Austin neighborhood, and we would do this rhyming game. It was a way to engage him. And for the readers who don't have that poem in front of them, the game is that you say a word and he answers back with a rhyming word. So she answers right. And that is kind of proto-conversation, I suppose. I was trying to teach him a back and forth. I will say something and he has to listen to what I say and respond. And in some way, answer my call. And I would do the same for him. He would say a word and I would try to find a rhyme for it. And just now, as you and I were talking, I wrote the word conversation down and I see the smaller word verse in it. And I know verse means to turn, to verse, to reverse. Implicit in a line of verse itself is this idea of a kind of volley forward and back. I think the functions of poetry are more present in my life in the everyday than I give them credit for. So I thought it'd be interesting just to hear maybe each of you talk about writing is implicit call and response or conversation, and that verse is this turning and maybe movement toward and reversal. I thought that was really, really fascinating and evocative. So not to put you too much on the spot, you can't do it wrong. Anything you say will be of interest.
Do you want to jump in, Carolina, since it was your question or your comment?
Yeah, well, just to provide a little more context about that part of our interview, my son was diagnosed with autism when he was 3, 4, and he wasn't speaking very much. And so it was something that I was very conscious of how we come into language, and his delay made me, come up with this game to enact something like a conversation. And it was, I think, something that I constantly find at the roots of poetry. When I write, I will often have someone in mind that I am answering to. Now I want to write to Issam. I mean, I think that our poems very much, not just mine and Issam, but ours as writers, are speaking to one another. There is that very delayed and, you know, over time and space, a kind of back and forth. What do you think?
I would welcome that, by the way, if you want to write to me anytime. I would say that, gosh, there's so much to say there. I mean, I think it's all song. I'm just thinking about the things that move me, and they're just so sonic, you know, even in the musical traditions that I grew up in, whether it was, you know, Middle Eastern music, in which call and response is actually, you know, part and parcel of it. Hip hop music, where call and response is part of it. And I would even say in the latter, you know, the rhythms of the language drive, you know, essentially I want to say the content, the rhythms of the language drive the content. And so in a sense, it's listening, for me, it's listening for the rhythms. Yeah, I don't know. I would say 80% of the time, I don't know what I'm actually saying in these things. They're really about that response to some aspect of sound. And in terms of like this kind of transmission, right? Language as transmission, or even poetry as transmission. I spend a lot of time thinking about the epistolary mode. And that every poem, in a sense, is an epistolary poem, right? Every poem, in a way, is a poem of direct address. There are very few that I could think of, are these, like, you know, big, like oracular, disembodied poems. Those are wonderful too. And so I think every poem is a response to, you know, either what has come before, whether you knew it or not, in the tradition, or the very, you know, whatever has emerged for you in that very moment. I think the practice, many people have the writing practice of now taking notes in their phones, and really what they're doing, I think, is writing down the thing that they intend to respond to later. So all of it is arising in response, I would say.
Thank you both. I don't know if we'll continue much longer, so I want to say thank you again. And then just if anybody has a question that you would like to pose to these fine writers. Well, I thank all of you for being here, for your generosity and sharing the space and hearing these writers share their work. And also relinquishing what to some is apparently the great joy of watching the Super Bowl. I am oblivious to that myself, but I found this a really, really satisfying and rewarding reading. And I will be following the work of both of these writers. So thank you again.
I want to echo my gratitude for everyone here, and both Issam and Carolina. These events just make my month. I appreciate all the faces in the room as well. Coming up very soon at AMCA, we have a woman named Allison Landa, who's sharing her book, The Bearded Lady,